Hi, welcome to week 7 of Games for Learning and Simulation. This week we're going to be working on the feature documents for the final project. So, the goal of the feature doc is to focus on one aspect of the game, to drill down, zoom in, and explore how a particular feature works, how it affects the game, how it affects the player. So, every game will have a single master document, but it will have multiple feature documents, ideally, one feature document for every core feature of the game. A feature doc has to address at least 4 areas. First, it has to answer the question of why is the feature being made? How does it add to the game? What is its purpose? Secondly, what are the goals driving this feature? What are the things that the feature is going to allow the player to do? What problems is it solving? What engagement is it providing? Third, we have a high level summary of the feature and how it works. And finally, we have some illustration of the feature in use. So, an example of this from the reading, we have the jump feature in Super Mario Brothers. The original Mario Brothers game and the Donkey Kong game had a jump mechanic. Neither of those jumping abilities were very fluid or dynamic. Basically, you just press the button and you jumped. In this game, they point out that one of the goals is to make it not only an effective tool of dealing with enemies, but to give you tight control and a nuanced skill expression. So, in other words, the ability to jump in different ways depending on the skill level of the player. So, if you've played Super Mario Brothers, you know you can run and jump, do a standing jump, walk and jump, slide and jump around corners, duck and jump, do all these different types of jumps and solve different puzzles based on how well you can control the jumping ability. The high level summary is that when you press a button, Mario will jump. The height and distance of that jump is controlled by speed, timing, button controls, and they point out that the jumping mechanic is the main way we deal with enemies, and jumping on enemies will trigger different reactions from different enemies. And so, another discovery mechanic or curiosity mechanic is what do I do for an enemy? How does my jumping affect a turtle versus a Goomba versus a Spiny? All these different things. And they also point out that jumping is the key mechanic in the game. And so every enemy design, every puzzle in the levels, every obstacle needs to take that into an account. Now, sometimes we have to go into more detail than what a feature doc allows. Sometimes, if we're providing information for a game developer on how to implement a feature, or we really need to go into detail on how a feature will interact with other aspects of the game, we may need to create a more technical document. These are usually called technical docs, technical breakdowns, functional specs, but these are just more detailed feature documents essentially. They typically add things like the exact controls, visual and audio feedback, the game mechanics, and other details like a backstory of why the feature is there. So, an example of this from Super Mario Brothers from the reading, we have a breakdown of how the different controls affect the jumping mechanic, as well as a note that holding A causes Mario to jump to a 4 brick height limit. And later on, we see that in the challenges and connections section that because of that, we have to make sure that we limit obstacles to 3 blocks high so that Mario is able to jump over them. There's a list of the mechanics of how the jumping ability interacts with different enemies, a description of the visual and audible sound effects. The sound effects, in particular, are important in this case. The Mario jumping sound effect is pretty iconic, and it was designed pretty specifically to sound cheerful and fun, even though it's like a frenetic way to deal with obstacles and enemies and danger. They also point out that there was in the original prototype of Mario, there was a punching mechanic that was removed in favor of the jumping mechanic. Originally, Mario was going to be able to punch enemies. Now, the core mechanic is jumping on them. They also say that they're going to add fireball throwing and reuse the animation from when he was going to be punching to animate the fireball throwing instead. They also put a little backstory in there about how Mario was a plumber and plumbers wear heavy boots, and that is why he is able to jump so high because he has such strong legs from that. Now, for your assignment for the final project, you are focusing on feature docs. You don't need to create functional specs. You can, if you have room in your single page constraint, to add some of these other things that you're super interested in, but don't feel like you have to go into the extreme technical details of the mechanics here. All right. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to me on Slack or through email. All right. Welcome to week 7 of Games for Learning and Simulation. This week, we're going to be working on the feature documents for the final project. So, as we discussed last week, the final project is broken up into 3 parts. Week 6 last week was the master game design document, and this week's feature documents. Just like last week, we have a template for you to use as a guide, and you'll create 2 to 3 different feature design documents for the game. So the link to the reading, if you scroll down, you'll find this section, template 2, the feature doc, and it goes through a couple of important points. First of all, why is this feature being made? How does this affect the player's experience? What are the goals driving the feature? How does it work? What needs to be done in order to make this feature part of the game? Ideally, there's some type of illustration showing the feature in use. It doesn't have to be as detailed as this example. Concept art is fine. And then there's some more tips on how to structure each of these sections. And if you scroll down, you'll find a great example of the jump feature in Super Mario Brothers, the executive summary of that feature, the reason the feature exists, the goals, high level summary of how the feature works, concept art, the feature breakdown with the controls, the mechanics, what happens when you jump, what happens when you land on different animals, how that affects things, how the controller affects this feature, the visualizations and sound effects, etc., and any side effects and backstory about why the feature exists. So these are all important parts, especially the backstory should tie into the narrative somehow. Again, you're going to create 2 to 3 of these related to your game as separate documents or as a single document with separate pages, and make sure that you follow the example format provided in this reading. Okay, all about the feature docs. If you have any questions, please reach out through email or on Slack.